That brings us to the third artifact now, okay, the Cyrus cylinder. So here we have this wild party going on, right, in Daniel chapter 5. And Darius the First, Darius the Mede, drains the river or diverts the river and comes into the city under the wall through the water system there and captures Babylon, a bloodless conquest overnight, okay, during this party there. So Daniel was promoted, right, third in the kingdom, but it was a very short promotion, maybe a matter of hours, and then the one who promoted him was gone. This happened in October 539 BC. Meanwhile, out in the field, Nabonidus, the king, right, the first in the kingdom, he is dispatching troops to Babylon to save his capital city because he hears about the Medes, on their way. He is stopped by Cyrus the Great, Cyrus the Second there. So Cyrus, a Persian, his forces are keeping Nabonidus from getting to Babylon, while Darius the Mede, his forces are invading Babylon. So they're working together, okay, on that same night. In his first year as king of Babylon, Cyrus issued the decree memorialized in the Cyrus cylinder. It has been called the first Magna Carta of human liberty. The excavated clay cylinder does not specifically or exclusively refer to the Jews, but it shows that all the inhabitants that were exiles in Babylon could return to their own homes. Now this also confounds the skeptics because before this was found, they believed that all ancient kings were ruthless, that they basically, if they didn't kill you when they conquered your country, they took you as slaves, you were captives. Basically, you were prisoners in their land, and there is no way that they would release you to go back to your land. There's no way you'd be able to worship your own God there. But Cyrus was different. Cyrus's name is mentioned in Isaiah chapter 43 and 45. The book of Isaiah was written, we believe, in the 8th century BC. Cyrus wasn't born until the 6th century BC. So we're talking about a prophecy that mentions him by name about 150 years before he's even born there. And in the prophecy in Isaiah 43 and 45, it says that he will let God's people back into their land. They'll be able to rebuild their temple and be able to set up the worship of God as they see fit. Now, Cyrus did that for everybody, not just for Israel. He was a very unusual king. And he had a totally different way of looking at things. Let's go on and talk more about him. They could have their captured deities. This is what he allowed. They could have their captured deities, their idols, their gods, and sacred objects restored to their temples, which were to be renovated. So you can go back to your land, you can rebuild your temples that were destroyed, and you can place your gods back in their sanctuaries. The Bible records the event in 2 Chronicles 36, 22, and 23, mentions Cyrus by name, and Ezra 1, 1 through 4. Ezra, of course, is the book that talks about the rebuilding of the temple, Solomon's temple. The prophet Isaiah referred to Cyrus a century in advance, and it's actually closer to a century and a half in advance, in Isaiah 44, 28, and 45. We read about him in the chapter before and the chapter after that also. The Cyrus cylinder is presently at the British Museum in London. There's a picture of it. You can see that's just some parts of it has been damaged there. The Cyrus cylinder marks a fundamental shift in Middle Eastern history. And Cyrus is the one who actually established what we call the Middle East. There was no such thing before his empire, which lasted over 200 years. The creation of the largest empire the world has ever seen up until that point. Cyrus the Great's reign began with his invasion of Babylon in 539 BC. Okay, we're not going to say BCE here, BC. He ruled over the entirety of the eastern Mediterranean, effectively creating the Middle East as we know it today. Is that important? It really is. The empire spanned from Libya and Turkey in the west to Afghanistan in the east. The Cyrus cylinder itself functioned like a press release, like read all about it, right? Notifying the public that it had a new ruler with new ideas. History records that when Cyrus accepted Nabonidus' surrender and then decided to come into Babylon as the new ruler, that he was greeted by celebration. People were happy to see Cyrus conquer them. And also they waved branches, okay, kind of like Palm Sunday when Jesus came in Jerusalem. They were excited, which doesn't say much for Belshazzar's rule, does it? Really. They knew that Cyrus must have had a reputation before he even got to Babylon there. For these people realized that their exile was over, basically. Okay. And the Jews were no different. Given the multilingual, multi-faith, and multicultural nature of his vast empire, Cyrus the Great was faced with a unique challenge of developing an approach to governance that embraced diversity. Different peoples, different culture, different languages, different worship. The system proved so successful that Cyrus the Great's dynasty lasted for 200 years until Alexander the Great invaded the empire. All right, so Babylon is the head of gold, the Medo-Persian is the chest of silver, and then the bronze would be the bronze hips, lower torso, is the Greek Empire in Nebuchadnezzar's Daniel chapter 2 dream. So here we have Alexander the Great, mentioned in Daniel chapter 8, right? He's the goat with the one horn there in Daniel chapter 8. He invades the empire. Alexander the Great, of course, expands that empire all the way over to India, not just Afghanistan, but all the way to India. His rule, aggressive and ineffective, talking about Alexander the Great's, caused the hitherto expansive empire of Cyrus's to fragment. How many fragments do we have when Alexander the Great falls? 4, right? Also mentioned in Daniel chapter 8. It was divided among his 4 generals, right? Cyrus the Great's principles of governance, as laid out in the Cyrus Cylinder, were an important influence on Western leaders. Now, this even touches America now. Thomas Jefferson owned 2 copies of Xenophon's, he's a Greek historian, Xenophon's biography of Cyrus the Great.